Hello, I'm Bridger LaPierre,
And I'm Ken Stockard.
and today we're going to be looking at our Integrating Language Arts and Social Studies by Leah M. Melber and Alice Hunter.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at strategy 25, which is authentic geography and cartography studies. So to start this section off, they have a short little bit of dialogue between a grandma and her granddaughter, and they're talking about how Czechoslovakia has become the Czech Republic due to a variety of different influences from different world wars and other conflicts. But either way, it ended up changing some of the street names as a result as well. So the introduction itself starts with, to teach students geography is to teach them to study space and place on the earth. Maps are an important tool to assist learners as they represent the world in spatial terms. However, because the earth is really a sphere, maps are always somewhat distorted, flat pictures of the three-dimensional earth. Try as they might, cartographers through the ages, from Mercator in the 1500s to Fuller in the 1960s, could not seem to eliminate the distortions. Nevertheless, maps have been essential navigation tools that help humans get from one place to another. Maps also can be viewed as historical documents that reflect the time, place, and knowledge available at their creation. Comparing historic and modern world maps can provide students with much to learn and to discuss. For example, about change in country names and borders and the reasons for these changes, as we just talked about with Czechoslovakia briefly. So in order for learners to begin to look at maps and see what they represent, it is essential for teachers to instruct them how to read these maps. Maps are complex pictures that require learners as readers and interpreters to master a variety of skills. They must know about map scale and map symbols to locate places. Once learners know about scale and symbols, they proceed to interpreting what is on the maps. This activity asks learners to make a cursory example of maps of the same place from two different time periods. The purpose of this activity is not to create mini cartographers, but rather to foster critical thinkers who can see how basic differences in maps can be interpreted. Such differences or changes can be seen as the result of political, social, or economic upheavals. Older elementary students can map changes as part of their study of change as a constant in human life. Changes in maps can be compared with changes due to growth in themselves. This activity is basically to provide students with a vehicle to focus their ability to compare and contrast two objects.
Thank you, Kenny. Now we're going to go ahead and look at curriculum standards for social studies and the standards correlated for the English language arts around this strategy. So looking at our social studies, we have strand 2, time, continuity, and change. Strand 3, people, place, and environment. And strand 4, science, technology, and society. Moving on to our English language arts standards. For this strategy, it reads, these standards build vocabulary as they learn about newly formed countries as well as countries whose names have changed. Standard 1, students read wide range of print and non-print text to build an understanding of text, of themselves, and of the cultures of the United States and the world. To acquire new information, to respond to the needs and demands of society and the workplace, and for personal fulfillment. Among these texts are fiction and nonfiction, classic and contemporary works. Moving down to standard 5, we have students employ a wide range of strategies as they write and use different writing process elements appropriately to communicate with different audiences from a variety of reasons. Moving to standard 8, students use a variety of technological and informational resources, libraries, databases, computer networks, videos to gather and synthesize information and to create and communicate knowledge. So this is a perfect segue into the resource that we have. Right here we have our technology connection. This is the Nat Geo website, and in more specific terms, it has a section of maps. And this is just super cool. Obviously, National Geographic has just amazing resources for teachers to bring this exact strategy into their classroom. They have awesome map stories throughout time, just really applicable mini lessons or stories and stuff to engage your students. They have over 800 map titles to choose from, so you could definitely find types of maps that you're teaching in your classroom, or that could be, more personal to students, and they can make better connections from that. And then 3, they talk about history of National Geographic cartographers and how their methods used to make the world's most authoritative and beautiful maps. So, these guys, like I said before, this is just an amazing resource. These guys' maps are just wonderful, and throughout time tells a really awesome story.
I say anytime you're doing stuff with geography and stuff, Nat Geo is going to be your source, and if you're doing astronomy or anything like that, NASA is kind of going to be your equal resource for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to the different key themes that are portrayed by these standards, which are making observations, interpreting charts and maps, finding patterns, finding relationships, inferring, and developing historical perspective, writing to demonstrate ability to compare and contrast.
Okay, so moving on to the materials needed for this activities, students are going to need a map of same area at different times in history, and then a data sheet so they can write down their collections.
Yeah, their little analysis and everything. So, and then the procedures for this actual activity. First, they start out with the purpose of this activity is to have learners of all ages develop their ability to compare and contrast visual images in the form of maps. Then they write about what they have observed in each map and compare and contrast these findings. Teachers give students 2 maps of basically the same area, like Bridger talked about in the materials. One is from the past, another from today. Each map must be identified with a number or letter that correlates with other map of the same area but of a different time. So they go into this, and it's kind of confusing the way they explain it, but basically having students understand like the concept of 1A versus 1B is very important in this activity. So learners fill out the data sheet as they look at and observe the features on each map. Next, they note what is alike on the 2 maps. Then they return to their original lists of features on each map to complete the data chart by noting how the maps are different. Each age level can complete the procedure. The reporting of the findings will get increasingly complex as students get older, which we'll talk about in the grade level modifications.
Thank you, Kenny. So for our grade level modifications, starting with kindergarten through 2nd grade, it is best for this age group that teachers simplify maps that are already available in print. For example, teachers can narrow what the students compare to a small area of a country or region of the world. Teachers can begin map studies by having students construct maps of their own room or rooms in their house. Then students can learn to compare and contrast by using the maps they created and comparing them to maps of other learners. It is important that teachers limit the number of map symbols that young learners encounter. They sometimes have difficulty connecting the symbols with the meaning. In addition, some young learners have difficulties conceptualizing the maps are flat drawings of 3-dimensional worlds. Using the internet, specifically Google Earth, to locate places that are familiar with should help them understand better. So again, this real briefly just shows that inclusion of technology and like these resources that just make it really easier to teach this strategy. So moving on to 3rd grade through 5th grade, students should already have some familiarity with map reading by the time that they are in grade 3 through 5. It should be interesting to introduce students to the different types of maps: climate, transit, political, physical, resource, and elevation, in addition to completing the activity by asking them to compare and contrast maps from different time periods. They could be challenged to study different types of maps of the same area. The data sheet for these age groups should be used as part of the pre-writing step of composing a paragraph or essay comparing and contrasting the 2 maps.
So as you can see, as we progress to the grade level modifications, they're just adding different like aspects and vernacular related to kind of cartography and like creation of maps. So on to the 6th through 8th grade, this is whenever they actually start worrying more about the language art side of it. So It relates that they should be well acquainted with map reading skills. The purpose of completing the data chart is to serve as a pre-writing step to composing an essay for 6th through 8th graders. This essay should begin with an opening statement about the student's conclusions relating to comparing and contrasting the maps. They have a very, very structured format here for this essay. The first paragraph should present details on the older map. The second, details on the newer map. The third paragraph should stress how the maps are alike. The fourth, how they're unalike. And the final paragraph should include plausible explanations for the similarities and differences. So through this essay writing, students are demonstrating that they are acquiring historical perspective through the study of cartography. As an extension of this activity, a member of a historical group or society could be asked to bring maps from various eras to the class and talk to the students about changes in their own community. We thought about this as an incorporation for IEFA. You could do different Native American maps and stuff like that compared to the maps that we have today. And then we're gonna move into meeting the needs of English learners. For meeting the needs of English learners, I decided to take this section once again because my WQP is discussing Alaska's ELLs. So for this section, for this activity, English learners can orally describe each map and draw conclusions about similarities and differences between the time periods. Teachers can work with these learners as a group or as individuals to help them complete the data sheet. Teachers should listen carefully to the students talking about the maps and then record the answers on a large version of the data chart. After completing the chart, teachers can work with the learner or learners to create a group paragraph or essay, so more of a collaborative project. This paragraph or essay likewise can be written on large chart paper, and students can then use it as a model for writing their own paragraph essay. And now I'm going to throw it over to Bridger here, and he's going to talk about special needs.
Thank you, Kenny. So moving on to meeting the needs of students with special needs, teachers need to understand that the basic idea that students are to learn from this activity is that maps show us that names and the borders change over time. Simplifying the activity or the data sheet so that it is completed as a jigsaw activity by a group of learners can facilitate understanding by those who have difficulty understanding the task. Some students with reading difficulties might find this activity easier than reading a textbook. Students with low vision can be given globes and maps that have raised features. Also, maps obtained from the internet sources can be enlarged easily through the use of projections equipment, which will make the maps and the features easier to distinguish. So I did my WQP project on RTI, and this has some really good examples of some tiers and interventions that teachers use. Small grouping is a huge one. Just getting the students who have the same struggles or skill deficits, it's good to get them partnered up and work with them. There's also in here, I could definitely see the incorporation of multi-level instruction, and that's just taking one objective and revising it and making it a little bit simpler, and just giving students who have a little more trouble, allowing them to do this, participate in these activities. So really good cross connections here, and yeah, really enjoyed this part.
So they go on to have an assessment suggestion when they talk about just using a very simple rubric to grade these students, but their rubric is extremely basic. I would suggest making one a little bit more fine-tuned, but overall a great strategy. And they also include, after the section is kind of like the data collection sheet, and it just goes through different questions such as like what land and water forms are on the map, what countries are named, what cities are included, landmarks indicated, and then they have it separated into the modern map where they ask the same questions again, and it's just kind of a duplicated responses to some extent, and then at the very end they ask to compare the answers from above. So it's just kind of prompting students, as you can see, how it would turn in for 6th through 8th graders, how it would turn into a very structured, awesome 5-paragraph essay.
Yeah, exactly.
So great strategy. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a good break.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.